Chile and Argentina are poised to become global powerhouses in the ag sector, but as we've seen, those countries are not without their problems. To learn more about the agriculture of these two countries, we turn to This Week in Louisiana Agriculture's Mychael Daniel. Mike?
You know, Avery, there are probably some misconceptions about agriculture in second world countries like Chile and Argentina, but as we have seen so far on our program, they are using some of the latest technology and some of the latest equipment, but there still are some challenges for farmers in Chile and Argentina. And joining us now to talk more about that is Dr. John Russin. He is the Vice Chancellor of Research for the LSU AgCenter on the Baton Rouge campus, and John has been traveling with us over the last 10 days. And John, tell us a little bit about what you see and what you see as the challenges that farmers in Argentina and Chile face.
Well, first let's begin, Mike, with some of the benefits that they have. Most American producers would come down here and would not be able to distinguish their production systems here from ours in the U.S. They've got all the best technology, the same that we do. They've got the best equipment. They've got some incredibly fertile soils. But some of the challenges they face are not because of equipment or technology or soil fertility or any of the other constraints that American producers usually deal with, but they're dealing more with government issues, federal policies regulating agriculture. For example, we spoke with a producer yesterday, a medium-sized producer, about 2,500 acres. Based on the translator's count. And as we looked at what he was doing to market his soybeans internationally, he told us, and this was a shock to all the producers here, that they pay a 35% export tax. Now, some quick math tells you that that takes $12 soybeans down to $8 soybeans, which is a pretty big shock when you're trying to balance a budget, dealing with these very same constraints on input costs and equipment costs, land rental issues that we deal with in the U.S.
And of course, the producer that John is talking about is Alejandro Calderon. We were at his farm, and I guess you're right, John. When you have to face a 35% cut right off the bottom line, you've got to figure out a way to kind of be more competitive. And one of the things that he did was incorporate Angus cattle into his operation. And the reaction from a lot of the farmers who were on that tour, they wanted to bring those cows home. To heck with suitcases and souvenirs, they wanted some of those Angus cattle. So he was using cattle as a way, I guess, to counterbalance some of those regulations and taxes. So you got to be diversified in these countries.
You certainly do. And the gentleman, in my opinion, sir, was brilliant. He had an agricultural engineering background, and you can see it in the way, the organized manner of his farm. The way his farm was laid out, just absolutely impressive. But he responded to the government regulations. I spoke about soybeans. He also grows wheat and corn. Now, some years ago, the government decided that they weren't going to export any wheat and corn. They were going to keep it all in country so that they can provide a food base for their population. They wanted to keep the food cheap so that people could buy it. So instead of undergirding that program nationally, they limited the price that farmers would get for wheat and corn. So basically, they put the entire burden of feeding the poor people in Argentina on the farmers' backs. He was very upset about that. So as a consequence, he made some very business-wise decisions to greatly diversify his operation.
Earlier in the program, we had a look at Chilean rice production, and it's evident that those producers in Chile are struggling, yet they are still very committed to growing rice. But as we saw in that story, they haven't had a new rice variety come out in 2.5 decades. Whereas Steve Linscomb and those guys down in Crowley, they're releasing new rice varieties almost as quickly as the calendar changes.
Well, you're absolutely right, Mike, and it's amazing. As we drove through the Chilean landscape, we saw cornfields that would rival our fields in the U.S. Certainly, the technology is here, the equipment's here, the understanding of the genetics is here. Somehow there's a disconnect with rice. We don't understand why, but somehow there is. So the very next day we visited one of their government-sponsored research stations to inquire about this, and it turns out they were making some decisions as to how to put their government resources to play that were not really addressing the producers' concerns. And so the producers, in response, formed a producer organization devoted to getting their own basic questions answered. And these are fundamental issues for rice production: fertility, water management, leveling, things like that. All the things you need to have in place to capitalize on the superior genetics that we have here in the U.S., or they could have here in South America.
Good information, John Russin. Thanks very much. Well, Avery, as you can see, a lot of challenges for farmers here in South America, but something that Louisiana and U.S. farmers certainly want to keep their eyes on. Back to you.
Mychael Daniel reporting from Pergamino, Argentina. Well, still to come on This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, why one Chilean winery plans on doing away with the cork. Nothing wrong with a screw-top wine. And in her Ag Minute, Kristen Oakes shows us how religion was responsible for Chile's vast wine-producing economy. Stay with us.